I never imagined I would be standing here, asking my wife the one question that had been nagging at the back of my mind for months. It was a question that felt like a storm gathering in my chest until finally it couldn't be ignored any longer. Why did you marry me? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Her eyes, once full of love and warmth, suddenly seemed distant, as if she were miles away, staring through me rather than at me. We had been married for 5 years, and in the beginning, everything felt perfect. The laughter, the late-night talks, the plans for our future. Those memories seemed like they belonged to someone else now. Somewhere along the way, something changed, and I was starting to feel it in every corner of our home. When we first met, she was everything I could have dreamed of. Beautiful, smart, confident. She lit up any room she walked into. We'd spend hours talking about our hopes and dreams, and I honestly thought I had found my soulmate. The idea that she might not feel the same way had never crossed my mind. But lately, the distance between us had grown too wide to ignore. The late nights at work, the silence during meals, the way she seemed more focused on her phone than on me. It all pointed to something I couldn't ignore. For weeks, I had tried to put the pieces together, searching for signs that I was just imagining things. But the truth hit me one evening, out of nowhere. I saw the look in her eyes when she thought I wasn't paying attention, a mixture of guilt and resignation. And that was when I knew she wasn't happy. But what I didn't know was why. That's why I asked her, plain and simple, why did you marry me? And what she said next changed everything. Her answer was honest, too honest, and it felt like a slap to the face. She looked at me, took a deep breath, and without hesitation said, "Because you were my last resort." Those words hung in the air between us, sharper than any argument we had ever had. I felt a wave of anger, confusion, and hurt all at once. What did that mean? Why hadn't she said something earlier? I had been living a lie without even knowing it. But in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let this go. The room fell deathly silent after she spoke those words. Because you were my last resort. The air between us felt thick, like it was holding something heavy. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to bear. I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. My mind raced. Was she joking? Had I misheard her? But no. The look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't joking. This was real. Her gaze dropped to the floor as if she couldn't bear to look at me, and she let out a soft sigh. I wasn't sure if it was regret or relief, but something inside me twisted. For years, I had given her my heart, my time, my love, and now I was hearing that it wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough. Last resort, I repeated, trying to wrap my mind around the words. My voice cracked, but I couldn't help it. The pain was real and I couldn't hide it. What does that even mean, Sophie? You! I paused, my throat tight, unsure of how to continue. You mean you only married me because you had no other choice? She looked up at me now, her face pale, and her eyes, those eyes that used to look at me with affection, now seemed distant and guarded. I didn't want to be alone, she said softly. I was running out of time. You know how it is. People keep asking when you can settle down, and all your friends are getting married, having kids. I felt like I was falling behind. You were a safe option. Her words hit me like a cold gust of wind. A safe option? Was that all I had been to her? I had been the man she chose when no one else was available, the person who happened to be around when she needed someone to fit the mold of what society expected. I could feel the anger bubbling inside me, but I pushed it down, tried to hold on to some semblance of control. So all this time, all these years, that's what this has been? A safe option for you? A backup plan? She nodded slowly, her hands trembling in her lap. I didn't mean to hurt you. I never meant to. But you were there, and I guess I thought. She stopped, searching for the right words, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't really know what she was thinking back then. She didn't know what she wanted, and I was just there. How long have you felt this way? The question left my lips before I could stop it. I needed to know. I needed the truth, even if it would destroy me. She hesitated, biting her lip, and then, almost as if she'd been holding in for far too long, she whispered, "For a while now, maybe even before we got married." My chest felt like it had been crushed under the weight of her words. Before we got married? How had I not seen the signs? How could I have been so blind? Was our entire relationship a facade? Were all those sweet words, those quiet moments of happiness, just a mask for something far darker? I thought I could learn to love you the way I was supposed to, she continued, her voice barely audible now. But I never really felt it. I never felt the spark. You were dependable, kind, and you loved me. That was enough for me at the time. But now it's different. I took a step back, my mind reeling. Everything felt like it was falling apart. So what, Sophie? What does that mean for us now? Do you still want to be with me? She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know. I don't know if I ever really did. But I don't want to hurt you more than I already have. I could feel my own anger rising again, but this time it wasn't just anger. It was betrayal. It was a sense of being discarded. It was a feeling of being nothing more than a placeholder in her life. Someone who was good enough until something better came along. Then why did you stay? The words were harsh, more biting than I had meant them to be. If you didn't love me, why stay? Why waste my time? Why waste both of our time? I thought I could grow to love you, she said quickly, almost pleading. I thought maybe I could make it work, but I couldn't. I know that now. I stood there frozen, trying to keep my emotions in check, but it felt impossible. It was like she had just stripped away everything I believed in, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. Our marriage, the life we built together, was now nothing more than a hollow shell. I had been living in a lie, believing in a love that had never truly existed. So all this time I was just convenient? I asked, my voice low and trembling with emotion. She didn't answer right away, but her silence spoke volumes. The truth was clear. I had been a convenience, an option when she had nowhere else to turn. I felt like I was drowning in the weight of her honesty, but at the same time, I could feel something inside me begin to shift. I had been living in a dream for so long, holding on to the illusion of love, and now that dream was shattered. But as painful as this moment was, something inside me was awakening. It wasn't just sadness I felt. It was anger. Anger at the situation, anger at myself for not seeing the truth sooner, and, most of all, anger that she had used me as a last resort. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to make her feel the hurt she had caused me. But instead, I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and made a decision. I wouldn't just sit here, helpless. I wouldn't let this be the end of my story. She had made her confession. Now, it was my turn to take control. I just didn't know how yet. Our relationship hadn't always been like this. In fact, when we first met, it was magic. Sophie and I were a perfect match. Or at least, that's what it felt like at the time. We were both young, full of hope and excitement about life, and we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. It was one of those whirlwind romances that seemed like it was straight out of a movie, and I believed every second of it. I remember the first time I saw Sophie. We were at a mutual friend's party, and she was standing by the snack table, laughing at something one of the guys said. She had this smile that could light up an entire room, and when she looked my way, it felt like the world had paused for a moment. I wasn't the most confident guy back then, but something about her energy made me feel at ease. We talked for hours at night, sharing stories about our childhoods, our dreams, even our favorite books. We had so much in common. It felt like fate had brought us together. We began dating soon after, and everything moved fast. There were so many nights where I'd find myself laughing uncontrollably at something silly she'd say, or just lying next to her, watching a movie, completely content in each other's presence. She was the kind of person who could turn an ordinary day into something extraordinary, and I was hooked from the start. Every time we were together, it felt like we were in our own little bubble, a world where nothing else mattered except us. Things progressed quickly. After about a year of dating, I started talking about our future. I was in love, and I wanted to build something with her. Something real. Sophie never seemed to shy away from these conversations. She talked about getting married, having a family, and growing old together. I was on cloud 9, imagining a life with her by my side. But looking back now, there were subtle signs I chose to ignore. Sophie had always been a little more practical than I was. She wasn't as carefree with her emotions, and even though she was kind and affectionate, there were times when I felt like there was a wall between us that I couldn't quite get through. She would often talk about the future, but it wasn't always in the same way I did. She'd say things like, "I just want to be settled," or "I don't want to be alone when I'm older." At the time, I thought she was just being cautious, maybe a little anxious about the idea of commitment. But now I see it differently. The first cracks in our relationship started to show about a year after we moved in together. At first, it was little things, tiny moments where she seemed distracted, like she wasn't fully present. We would have dinner, but instead of enjoying a meal or talking about our day, she'd be on her phone, scrolling through social media or checking emails. It wasn't a huge issue at first, but over time, I started noticing it more. The warmth we had when we first met began to fade. I told myself it was just the stress of work or the routine settling in, but it wasn't just that. Sophie became more distant. We didn't spend as much time together as we used to. The late-night talks we once had turned into quiet evenings, where I was left to watch TV alone while she did something else in the other room. Sometimes, I'd come home from work to find her in the same spot, buried in her laptop or phone, not even acknowledging my arrival. It was as though she was physically present but emotionally absent. There were other moments, too, smaller things that I couldn't quite place but now seemed like glaring red flags. When we went out with friends, she seemed almost distant, like she was more interested in talking to others than being with me. If I tried to bring up something personal, something about our future or how I was feeling, she'd brush it off with a half smile or an, "I don't know, I'm just tired." I remember a few times when I tried to initiate intimacy, but she'd make excuses. It started feeling like I was the only one making an effort to keep things alive. And then there were the moments when she would look at me, not in the loving way she used to, but in a way that made me feel like I was disappointing her. She'd sigh and I'd ask her what was wrong, but she'd always say, "Nothing, I'm just tired." But I knew there was more to it. I just didn't want to face the possibility that something had changed in her, that maybe, deep down, she wasn't in love with me anymore. Still, I tried to be the perfect husband. I planned date nights, surprised her with gifts, and did everything I thought would make her happy. But nothing seemed to reach her. The distance between us only grew, and the more I tried to close that gap, the wider it seemed to become. A few months before that fateful conversation, I started to feel like something was seriously wrong. Sophie was spending more and more time at work, and when she was home, she was always distracted or distant. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was pulling her away from me. I wondered if there was another man, but I didn't want to entertain that thought. I trusted her, and I didn't want to accuse her of something that wasn't true. Yet, deep down, I knew something was off. There were times when I would catch her staring at her phone, and she'd quickly hide it when I walked by. Other times, I'd hear her laughing on the phone, but when I asked who she was talking to, she'd hesitate before saying, "Just a friend." It didn't make sense, but I didn't press her. I didn't want to believe it. But everything came to a head that night. The night I asked her, "Why did you marry me?" The moment that shattered everything I thought I knew about our relationship. I didn't know it then, but that question would change the course of my life forever. Looking back, I can see the signs now. I see how Sophie had been distancing herself for a long time. She had never been fully invested in our relationship, and I had been too blind to see it. The truth was there all along, tucked away behind small, seemingly insignificant moments. But I had ignored it, hoping that love would be enough to fix everything. And in the end, love wasn't enough. I had always prided myself on being a patient man, a man who believed in forgiveness and understanding. I thought I could move past anything, that love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. But after Sophie's confession, something inside me snapped. The hurt, the betrayal, it was too much. The trust one had built my whole life on was shattered, and the only thing left inside me was a cold, bitter anger that I couldn't ignore. I had to do something about it. I couldn't just let this slide. She had been so brutally honest with me, and now I was determined to make her feel what I had been feeling. Humiliated, small, and completely worthless. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my power, my dignity. I had spent years letting Sophie dictate the terms of our relationship, allowing myself to be the safe option in her life, never once questioning whether I was being truly loved. Now, I had the chance to turn the tables. But I wasn't going to do it out of sheer impulse. No, I needed a plan. I needed something that would hit her where it hurt, but not in a way that would leave me feeling like I had stooped to her level. I wasn't going to be petty. No, I would be smarter than that. The plan had to be calculated, and it had to be effective. I needed to make Sophie realize just how wrong she had been in taking me for granted. It was time for me to stop being the man she could walk all over. The first step was simple: distance. I had to make her feel the absence of me in her life. When we first got married, I was always there for her. Whenever she needed someone, I was there. I would drop everything just to make sure she was happy. But now I would do the opposite. I would be unavailable. I would become a stranger in my own home. I started by pulling back emotionally. I stopped initiating conversations, stopped trying to connect with her on a deeper level. I no longer asked about her day or showed interest in her life. If she came home late from work, I would be completely indifferent, not asking where she'd been or if everything was okay. I was no longer the attentive husband who wanted to be there for her. I became someone who seemed distant, someone who could easily be replaced. The more I withdrew, the more I could see it affecting her. I noticed the way she would look at me, as if she was trying to figure out where the man she had once married had gone. It wasn't long before she began making small attempts to reach out, trying to reestablish the connection that had long been lost. But I was resolute. I couldn't make it easy for her. If she truly loved me, if she truly wanted me, she would have a fight for it this time. Next, I started focusing more on myself. Sophie had always been the center of attention in our relationship, and I had always put her needs before mine. But no longer. I began working out more, getting into shape, something I had neglected for a while. I started picking up hobbies I had forgotten about, reading more, going for long walks, spending time with friends. I made sure to have a life outside of our marriage, something Sophie had never seen me do before. I could tell she was confused by this sudden change. One evening, she asked me, "What's going on with you? You've been acting so distant lately." Her voice was tinged with frustration, but I just shrugged and told her I was tired. But the most significant part of my plan came when I started casually talking to other women. It wasn't anything serious at first, just innocent conversations, a few flirty exchanges at work, a couple of friendly chats with women at the gym. But the idea was clear. I wanted Sophie to know that I wasn't the only one in the world who could be relied upon. I wasn't the only man who could be a safe option. She had treated me like a backup plan, and now I was going to make sure she saw what it felt like to be the one left behind. I didn't go overboard. I didn't want her to catch me doing anything inappropriate. But I made it clear to Sophie that I wasn't just sitting around waiting for her attention anymore. Slowly but surely, she began to notice. I saw the way she would watch me when I talked to other women, the subtle shift in her behavior, as she began to realize that I wasn't the man she thought she could take for granted. And that's when I started noticing something else. She began to change. Sophie became more attentive. She started asking about my day again, and there was a new spark in her eyes when she looked at me. It wasn't the same as before, though. It wasn't the kind of love I had wanted. It was desperation. She wanted me back, but not for the right reasons. She wanted me back because she realized that I wasn't the man she could push aside anymore. I won't lie. A part of me enjoyed the power I held. I reveled in the fact that I could make her feel like she was losing me. But at the same time, there was a sense of emptiness growing inside me. This wasn't the kind of revenge I had envisioned when I first set my plan in motion. It wasn't giving me the satisfaction I thought it would. Seeing Sophie fight for me felt good at first, but then it started to feel hollow. It was as if I had won the battle, but I was losing the war within myself. At some point, I began to question whether this was really worth it. Was making her feel the way I felt going to heal the wounds she had caused? Or was I just digging myself into a deeper hole, becoming the very person I had despised, bitter, resentful, and unforgiving? But for now, I was in control. And maybe that was enough. Maybe this was the first step in finally freeing myself from the chains she had bound me with for so long. I wasn't a man who could be taken for granted anymore. I wasn't a man who would just sit by while someone used him as their backup plan. And I was starting to like the feeling of power. At first, the silence between Sophie and me felt like a weight on my shoulders. It was suffocating, but also strangely liberating. I had never been the type to play games or use petty tactics, but I was starting to see how people, especially those who take you for granted, could change when they felt the heat of their own actions turn back on them. Sophie had walked all over me for so long, and now, for the first time, I had control. It wasn't just about making her feel bad. It was about showing her that I didn't need her the way she thought I did. I had a life beyond her, and she was going to learn what it felt like to lose someone who once adored her. The first few days after I began pulling away, Sophie seemed confused. She would ask me questions like, "Are you mad at me? Or did I do something wrong?" But I just shrugged it off, acting nonchalant, like I was busy with my own life. At first, it seemed harmless, just a subtle shift. But soon, it became clear that the tables were turning. Sophie's usual calm, collected demeanor started to unravel. She began to put more effort into fixing things between us. One night, she prepared dinner for us, something she hadn't done in ages, and sat down with me, trying to reestablish some kind of connection. "I miss us," she said quietly, the vulnerability in her voice almost pitiful. But I wasn't moved by it. In the past, I would have rushed to reassure her, tell her everything would be fine. This time, I didn't. I simply responded, "You're not the only one who misses things." That was the turning point. Sophie looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She had always been the one to hold the power in our relationship, always the one who made the decisions. But now, I could see it. She was second-guessing herself, unsure of whether I still cared. She was trying so hard to get back to the way things were, but I wasn't going to let her. I needed her to feel the sting of the emotional distance I had felt for her so long. Over the next few weeks, I kept the emotional distance intact. I didn't reply to her text right away. I stopped being the one to suggest things to do, and I made sure to spend more time with friends or at the gym, places where I felt like I could breathe without the constant pressure of her needs. She would occasionally try to pull me into deep conversations about us, but I always kept them short and impersonal. I don't know, Sophie. Things are just different now. I'd say, shrugging, acting like it didn't matter to me. And the more I acted like I didn't care, the more she started to panic. Her efforts intensified. She'd plan little surprises, like buy my favorite snacks or try to initiate a night out. Once, she even suggested we go on a weekend getaway, just the two of us, to reconnect. It was sweet, in a way, but it also felt desperate. She wasn't just trying to fix things. She was trying to win back control. But by this point, I could see it for what it was, a last-ditch effort to keep me from slipping through her fingers. I didn't fall for it. Instead, I began spending more time with other women. They were nothing serious, just women I met through work or at the gym, but the effect was immediate. Sophie began to notice, and I could feel her anxiety growing. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but the thought of me getting attention from others made her realize just how little I had mattered to her before. She had taken me for granted, assuming I'd always be there. But now I wasn't the same man. I was someone else, someone who had found his own strength, someone who wasn't afraid to walk away. One evening, Sophie walked in on me talking to a woman on the phone. I was in the living room, chatting casually about work, but I saw her standing in the doorway, watching me with wide eyes. She didn't say anything at first, but her silence spoke volumes. She stood there for a moment, and I could see the familiar flicker of jealousy in her eyes. It wasn't even about the woman on the other end of the phone. It was about the fact that I was no longer hers to command, no longer the man who would drop everything for her. The next day, Sophie tried to confront me. "Are you seeing someone else?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. I paused, letting the question hang in the air for a moment before answering calmly. "No, Sophie, I'm not seeing anyone else. But maybe I should be. I'm not going to sit around waiting for you to decide if I'm worth your time anymore." That was the moment it all came crashing down for her. She could see it now. I wasn't just distant. I was actively making her feel what I had felt all these years. I wasn't the man she thought she could walk all over. I wasn't the man who would wait around for her attention or affection. I was a man who had found his own way, and if she wanted me back, she was going to have to fight for it. Sophie tried harder than ever to win me back after that. She started calling more, texting more, and even showing up at places where I hung out with my friends. But it felt different now. It wasn't out of love. It was out of desperation. She had lost control, and she was willing to do anything to regain it. But I wasn't interested in winning her love back anymore. I wasn't even sure I wanted it. What I had wanted was to make her feel what I felt all these years. The pain of being nothing more than a fallback option, a safe choice, someone who wasn't truly loved but merely tolerated. The more Sophie struggled, the more I realized something that had become clear. My revenge wasn't about her, it was about me. It was about proving that I wasn't the weak man I had been before, the one who would bend to her every whim. I had gained something from all of this, something I hadn't expected, my own sense of power. It wasn't about hurting her anymore. It was about healing myself. But as Sophie's desperation reached its peak, I couldn't help but wonder, what now? Was it too late for me to move on from this? Or was this just the beginning of something deeper, something more painful that neither of us had anticipated? The days that followed were a blur of confusion and introspection. Sophie's attempts to win me back became more frantic, more desperate. But by then it had become clear to both of us. What we had wasn't love anymore. It wasn't even close. It had been a relationship built on routines, expectations, and convenience. And when that foundation cracked, all that was left was a hollow echo of what once was. I had got my revenge, in a way. Sophie was no longer the calm, controlled woman who had once held all the power in our relationship. I had flipped the script, but as the dust settled, I realized that the satisfaction I thought I'd feel wasn't there. Revenge, I found, doesn't heal the wounds. It only digs them deeper. Sophie, for her part, seemed to crumble under the weight of her own actions. I saw the way her confidence shattered, how her usual poise dissolved into nervous energy and frustration. She tried to talk to me, tried to apologize, but I wasn't the man she had married anymore. I was someone who had been hurt, betrayed, and made to feel like a backup plan. And I couldn't just go back to how things were, not after everything. It wasn't fair to me, and it certainly wasn't fair to her. The hardest part wasn't seeing her beg for my attention. It was realizing how little I really knew her, how much of our relationship had been based on illusions. Sophie wasn't the woman I thought she was, and I wasn't the man she had hoped I'd become. We had both been living in a lie, and now it was time to face the truth. In the weeks that followed, I found myself slowly pulling away, physically and emotionally. I didn't want to hurt her, but I knew staying in this toxic cycle was only going to cause more damage. I started focusing more on my own growth, something I had neglected for so long. I began to rebuild my life. This time, not for anyone else, but for me. I rekindled old friendships, traveled to places I had always wanted to visit, and, most importantly, I started rediscovering who I was outside of my relationship with Sophie. As for Sophie, she eventually stopped trying to win me back. It wasn't out of giving up, but out of realization. She knew, deep down, that we were no longer the people we had once been. The damage was done. The trust was broken beyond repair, and no amount of apologies or effort could fix that. Months later, I moved out. The finality of it felt strange, almost surreal, like I was walking away from a chapter in my life that I had once thought would never end. But it was the right thing to do. The hardest part wasn't the physical separation. It was accepting that I had given my all to someone who never truly valued me. Moving forward, I learned that healing doesn't happen overnight. The scars were deep, and they took time to fade. But I also learned that revenge wasn't the answer to fixing the hurt. It was a painful step in the process, but it wasn't the solution. What I needed wasn't to make Sophie feel the pain I felt. It was to find peace with myself, to forgive myself for allowing myself to stay in a relationship that wasn't healthy. The revenge, in the end, was just a catalyst, a wake-up call. What came after was about reclaiming my own life, rediscovering who I was, and ultimately, finding a sense of closure. Life moved on. And finally, so did I.